The Single Mother, The Orbit of Maryam, June 2020, Chapter 3.3. As a devoted Catholic who was in a Christmas play every year during childhood, I was quite shocked to find that the narration of the Nativity in the stable was weaker in the Bible than what I expected it to be, but even more shocked to find the Quran's account of the birth of Jesus when I opened the book. And it was the very first verse that appeared to me, but I had a policy of determined objectivity. So always researched before deciding and persisted with both the Bible and the Quran, while patient with any text that seemed out of place or challenged my preconceived notions. My understanding of the events has increased in appreciation long after conversion, and so I will continue with the story. Maryam alayhi salam sat in solitude and prayer, inaccessible to the public world. It came as a huge surprise for her mentor Zakaria alayhi salam to find her with fruits out of season, which causes us to stop and reflect on how unattainable she was. They lived in a time when women were divorced and had no choice but to shack up with men to survive. She was single and alone, yet provided for. Fruits out of season. Today, this can easily be taken for granted as we ship in and buy fruit out of season all the time. But then it wasn't possible, as the fruit from other lands would rot over long journeys from a different hemisphere, but she received them fresh, and no one was in contact with her except her guardian. So he inquired about them. She casually replied that they were a gift from the Lord who gives to whomever he pleases. She didn't put herself on a pedestal and claim that she was extra special. And so in this quote, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding us that he is the giver, and we should be open to receive irrespective of how we see ourselves. We create our poverty because we don't perceive ourselves as worthy of acceptance. We block the blessings that are always accessible, but we can accept blessings that are beyond our expectations. Our devotion and worship are for Allah only, and so we have to be open-minded as to the results of that, since we are dealing with someone beyond our imagining. When we practice religion to cultivate interpersonal skillfulness while attracting blessings of God through remembering Him, we open ourselves to the miracles that we would normally close ourselves off to by being sucked into the limited thinking of this worldly system. Peace be upon Maryam. She wasn't using mind control or pushing her energy on any plan, but simply quietly orbiting in her gentle reception of the provision. She patiently allows the greater consciousness that encompasses the universe to bring something delightful out of nothing. Which of the blessings of our merciful Lord would we deny? Her witness, Zakaria, whose name is rooted in the word like dhikr, which means remembrance, and more specifically remembrance of God. So he figured that since the fruit came out of season, then he and his wife could also have a child out of season. So not only did he ask for dhurriyatun, offspring or generation like the root of dhura, meaning seed, and a legacy to continue his work, but was very specific about it. He requested a son with toib, which means goodness in him, which could not be found in some of the clergy that were peers to him. But he was to be blessed with a son of complete chastity and humility, who would guide people in a complementary spiritual movement that would later flourish like a heavenly tree. Could it be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put it in him to ask? Could it be that the things that we want, that have goodness in them, are put in us as well? Could it be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is using this story to inspire and challenge us to go beyond our shyness with Him and get closer to Him, to intimately ask what He has placed in our hearts, that which is lawful and beneficial? Peace be upon Zakaria, who was greeted by angels congratulating him on his son, and they gave extremely specific prophecies regarding him that validated the details of his request. We find in our own lives that when we experience smaller miracles, there are always these details and signs confirming that these gifts are personal and not to be taken for granted. This is a reminder to me first and foremost. Peace be upon Zakaria and his postmenopausal wife. They weren't the only ones out of season, and so too was the virgin, isolated from society and lacking contact with the world, thus making her untouched. The Creator was to plant another seed into the virgin so that both mothers would birth messengers of truth and growing consciousness, delivering fruits of faith for many generations to come across the globe. Soon the virgin was to receive this news, although intense and heavy to bear. Later in the same room, she received her fruit, and her reminder received his news. She was greeted by angels and exalted to the level close to prophethood, so to speak. Peace be upon the angel Gabriel, known as Jibreel, who amidst the entourage of the Holy Spirit being, gave her the news and instructed her to prostrate and then stand with those who pray. Let's stop and appreciate the instruction given. Today, Muslims around the world go into prostration in their 5 daily prayers because they were instructed to by Quran and Hadith. Modern Christians never do this, so it's interesting to note that the Quran says that there are Christians who are or claim to be Muslim, as in they submit to God and prostrate. This is a verse in the Quran where Allah informs this, so was it only referring to the Christians of that time that verse was revealed, or before then? Let me tell you a little something interesting that I discovered before becoming a Muslim. Oprah was doing a segment on drug addiction and interviewed a wide-eyed blonde Texan about her experience in rehab. She testified about her experience, almost unblinking, that she had a moment where she decided in the depth of her detox pain to submit to God, and in that moment was compelled to place her face to the floor and prostrate. Despite Oprah's once beautiful declaration of submission, she brushed off the lady as much as she did in her newfound elitist detachment, and that she also dismissed the 2 former wife-beaters turned Christian men who claimed that it was their newfound sense of God consciousness that reformed them from domestic tyranny. Coincidentally, these 2 men didn't know each other, but were so similar in that each of them was a pharaoh in their respective households before embracing faith. There was another interesting incident also in Texas that inspired a series of books by an American man called Tommy Tenney. He testified that he and other Christian folk went to church one Sunday and felt something strange. He picked up on this energy, and so did everyone else. He said that everyone felt that, quote, God was up to something. People started to feel unsettled. Some people started crying. A group of them got up and began prostrating in one direction, while cars lined the blocks and new people were flocking to join the church, which became flooded by the remembrance of God, which overwhelmed the congregation and left people bowing in submission, and most of them begging for forgiveness. Subhanallah, or glory be to God. According to Norman Ali Khan and his series of Jesus in the Quran, he said that prostrating in the case of Maryam in these verses represents the overwhelm of God's consciousness that leads one to face the floor in complete humility and surrender. The same scholar has a huge following of students learning the Quran while making the word of Allah accessible worldwide from his base in Dallas, Texas, of all places. But despite his logical conversations with local pastors, none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can lead people to submission and inspire them with prostration. The same Lord that instructed Maryam alayhi salam to do so before instructing her to stand as with those who stood, thus signifying her return to the community and alliance in worship. Arguing logic with a Christian is pointless, and only common ground should be sought. The rest is up to God. Peace be upon Maryam. She moved eastward, and this could be in the temple or somewhere in the town. It's possible that she started her period and was moved out of the temple, thus signifying her readiness for the rest of the news. Allahu Alam. God knows best. Either way, she was alone again and screened herself off so that she could continue her dedication in solitude uninterrupted. She was naturally surprised to find a man in her space, so she loudly prayed for protection and warned him of Allah. To which he replied that he was just a messenger giving her news of a pure boy. She asked how that would be since no one had touched her. As much as she calmly replied to Zachariah's question, similarly she was met with the same level of cool certainty when he responded with the affirmation that Allah makes that which he wills easily and will make him a sign for the people and a mercy from God, and it is a matter decreed. The angels had told Maryam that Allah would send a word from him, and his name would be the Messiah Isa, Jesus son of Maryam, and in the world and the hereafter as someone nearest to Allah. She was told that he would speak to the people from the cradle into maturity and will be from the group of people that are righteous. Again, Allah creates that he wills, and when he decides a matter, he says, be, and so it is. Maryam was told that her son would receive and be taught the book of laws, Kitab al-Torah, and sound, intuitive judgment, hikmah from the Injil, as a messenger to the children of Israel. He will say, indeed, I come to you with signs from your Lord. She was informed that he would make a bird from clay and breathe into it and bring it to life, bi'ithni Allah, or as Actor Jim Caviezel says with the Aramaic in the movie Passion of the Christ, Bi Allah, which means by God's leave. She was further informed that he would cure the blind, the leper, and give life to the dead, by God's leave. He would inform people regarding what they had in their homes to expose the truth of some of their hoarding, hypocrisy in the community, while restoring the simple truth of the original Torah in calling out the hypocrites that added to religion to make it difficult and oppressive for others, thus making lawful what man had no right to make unlawful. Right now, as I type this is June 2020, I can think of many examples of what the authorities in the government and media have made unlawful while distracting us from more serious crimes. BLM riots have flared while Africans get used as guinea pigs for vaccinations, police have violated basic human rights, and citizens have been penalized for trying to feed their families. Statistics have been fabricated while minorities have been killed in hospitals to justify testing them with vaccination trials. If the second coming of Jesus, peace be upon him, is to arrive now or soon, then that would make sense. But many scholars say that there is more to come. Allahu Alam. It seems to be his theme, the kicker of sandcastles built by trivial and useless laws that imprison our minds and block us from all truth while guiding believers to the straight path. Since we are talking about Christianity-related subjects or Christ, I want to bring your attention to a Christian lady named Kathy Barnett. She grew up in southern Alabama, and when it was time for her to go to college, she decided to go into the Army Reserve. She went to find her original birth certificate so that she could apply and found two disturbing details. The first detail was the reference to her mother as a, quote, Negro girl. That hit her hard. Then even more shocking revelation was that her mother was 12 when she gave birth, and soon found out that she was only 11 when she was raped. It must have been devastating to be hit by that kind of information. Can you imagine the mother you feel connected to and fondness for having to endure the worst and most degrading, most violating of hardships that a female could endure at such a vulnerable and delicate age? Kathy was still choking on some tears a few years later after recalling her finding that and what that implied. So her mother was pregnant against her will, but Kathy's grandmother had the strength to tell her daughter emphatically, "We're going to get through this." What a wonder woman. So powerful. Allahu Akbar. Kathy's mother had the baby, and thank God that she didn't have the choice, and her daughter grew up knowing nothing but love. Not only is this a tribute to the sacredness of life, but that her life specifically has a purpose, and the glory of the light that God breathes into life is greater and more powerful than any trauma or infliction. That if we are open to the healing that accompanies that breath, she acknowledged that in the beginning her Creator decided her existence and decided that she would be. She said that when she was in the womb, quote, he was knitting her together. She was her children and she has her children and a wonderful husband. This family and their legacy of hope and triumph over the wicked deed wouldn't have blossomed and bore the fruit of optimism had her mother terminated her. Her trauma would have been, and her healing has its own thing. It would seem harsh to force a girl to carry full term, but she needs to be aware of this before the first term is over and the soul comes into the baby according to Hadith. Terminating would add more trauma to the trauma for at least 5 years. That's according to mainstream Planned Parenthood articles, which try to make out that 5 years of regret and trauma is no big deal, while many cases not founded on Google testify to a lifetime of regret. Excluding the rare narcissist, how many women have regretted having their children? Kathy and her family are still in deep gratitude regarding the matter decided. The womb is the sacred space that the word is breathed into. God says be, and so it is. Some question the Immaculate Conception, but Allah reminds us, do you not consider your conception a miracle? So again, take a pen and prick a page. Then look at the dot that you left. The egg fertilizes is smaller than that dot, and the sperm that fertilized it is even smaller than that. The difference between nothing and the dot itself is the dot itself. Is it not a miracle that you were literally smaller than that dot, or even a needle prick, and yet here you are, a fully grown athlete, baby-making machine, lover, intimate partner, multitasking, juggling, community activist, standing up to the pharaohs of the world, reciting scripture in a beautiful melody, blessing your home as the high priestess of the house, and first teacher to your children while still hustling with the world. Are you not a great miracle just by existing? How can we question the one who has created everything out of nothing regarding his capability to create Jesus in the virgin womb? Are we such dullards that we lack the imaginative capacity to see past our noses? This miracle, as all others, is easy for Allah, and so when we are open to that, then we are open to everything. The angel Jibril then breathed into Miriam's sleeve and fertilized the egg that came into the uterus, thus making her pregnant once it attached to her womb. And as she grew, she hid her pregnancy while going into hiding, much like the mother of Moses. There is this parallel in history, almost like a continuous saga, craft fully written by someone who has great focus and extremely intensive long-term planning. We forget that this plan continues, and we are written characters playing roles within that greater conspiracy. But unlike the mother of Musa, Miriam hadn't been a mother before, let alone been touched by a man or anyone. The mother of Moses had 2 previous children, and so by the time she had him, she knew how to breathe, and more importantly, she knew how to focus her vaginal muscles as if they were the only thing that existed in terms of sensation during the contractions. It's very easy to give birth quietly in an area full of people if you know how, and if you've had 2 children naturally, then you could have figured this out. The best way to explain this to a man is to ask him to hold up his hand and clench his fist. Once he has done so, then he must close his eyes, focus on the center of his fist as if nothing else exists, then squeeze tighter for 20 seconds and increase the tightness of the grip with each second, making the fist tighter, tighter, tighter until it gets to 20, then you can release and relax. So when they tell the woman to push, or here in Africa they say po po, what they really mean and should rather say is that she should squeeze her muscles, her vaginal muscles, and make them tighter during contractions while counting to 20 seconds to help her focus on doing that long enough for it to work. She'll be quieter and more successful, inshallah. Before I figured this out, I screamed in terror from the pain as it overwhelmed me with the worst torture a human can experience. Peace and blessing be upon Queen Asiya, who had been subjected to a variety of torture before Allah took her soul, but none of that could compare with what this young woman was going through. As the virgin's contractions grew, she left the town and found a remote area under a tree to give birth so that she could have privacy. A first-time mother can quite easily get caught off guard. It's not that surprising that as her contractions got stronger that she became distressed and panicked. Some male scholars interpret her cries of, quote, "I would rather be dead and forgotten than endure this," to be about her fear of dealing with the people in the town and their accusations. As a woman who's given birth, I can tell you that while in labor, the last thing a woman is worried about is other people's judgments or even stoning her to death, because the pain is so intense that you can't even think or even worry about how you look to others. It is so all-consuming that some women don't care that they're exposed with their hair out, sweating, and red in the face while puffing. There are many cultural exceptions, especially in the Middle East, though, but the point is the pain tends to be the greater distraction above all else. There is nothing glamorous about giving birth, and the intensity of it can easily consume a woman's concentration. There could be a civil war outside the hospital with bombs exploding and rioters looting amidst a variety of anarchy and danger. She wouldn't care at all in that moment. She is too busy dealing with the worst pain a human can face to worry about anything else. So when Lady Maryam said that she would rather be dead and forgotten than endure what she was going through, trust me, she was referring to the pain of childbirth. The responding verses in the Quran make more sense as a result. Before we get into that, I was, quote, fact-checked by some audacious little employee at Facebook headquarters, issuing a fatwa on a meme I shared, declaring it false. The meme stated that the human body can endure 45 units of pain while a woman goes through 50 units during birth, which is the equivalent of 20 bones of the body breaking simultaneously. The, quote, fact-checker sent an article stating that there is no way of measuring pain and that there are no established units for pain threshold. Okay, so fair enough, pain is subjective and there is no clinical way of measuring pain from one experiment to another or being able to capture such a rating, but show that same meme stating that, quote, giving birth is as painful as breaking 20 bones in the body simultaneously to any mother and she would agree wholeheartedly. It makes perfect sense to anyone who has been in labor because that's what it feels like. So, although the little quote fact checker may be technically right, he or she is also being a little insensitive in his or her dismissiveness and a little annoying to say the least. The pain of labor involves heavy and intense gripping spasms in the muscles of the torso that are so sharp and all consuming that a woman can't think or speak when they climax. She will have to do her praying and affirmations in the space of stillness before they begin again. Then she will have to put all her mental and physical energy into squeezing her muscles below while her body feels like it's being gripped like a tube of toothpaste, grabbed from the middle, which she won't even notice if she gets the former done right. An expert baby pusher doesn't feel the pain that much because those same contractions help her with the pushing. But if she doesn't know what to do, then oh boy, is she in for something. Peace be upon Miriam, who didn't even have a first time, had never been touched, and spent so much of her life in herself and prayer while screened off. Now her body is going into full throttle. So, given the circumstances, she could quite easily scream or yell from fear of the uncontrollable pain. It's just as well that she was far from the town because it's unlikely that she would have been quiet and composed. I can't help but imagine that she would have been tearful, puffy, sweating, trembling, and terrified, as well as breathless and tired. So men think that they are the strong ones. Just as women are sexually introverted in comparison to men's extroverted stimulation, likewise our power is hidden and that much more intense. To be powerful like men and disown our maternal channeling is to be less powerful. There's always this quiet moment between rounds where a woman can compose herself briefly for one final battle in the ring, like the box in the corner gets his water and pep talk from his coach, rubbing his shoulders before urging him back into the fight. He's going in pumped for one final hit and win. Miriam has this moment when a voice speaks to her from below and tells her to shake the tree and eat from the fresh dates and drink the fresh mineral water appearing at her feet. Just as much as the Rahmatullah has filtered through women, giving them the strength to lift cars and trucks off their children in certain recorded cases, this mother, pumped by a similar adrenaline, shakes the tree. According to research, dates are perfect for pregnant women because they have iron, but also enough fiber to keep them from being constipated. They are so packed in nutrition that some doctors and nutritionists who know nothing about hadith and sunnah say that if a person eats a few a day, then they don't need supplements. But they warn that the sugar is so fattening that one will have to be careful with the quantity, especially when combining dates with a Western diet. That wasn't Miriam's problem, as she was living in a very clean, organic, Middle Earth environment and in a need of a shot of sugar and nutrients to boost her energy. In addition to that, dates are good for contractions, and the water would have also refreshed her by hydrating her, which would have also aided latching after birth. In our industrialized modern stupidity, we give boxes in the ring water, but the pregnant woman working so much harder gets nothing. And they wonder why so many get so tired and go for C-section and struggle to get their babies to latch afterwards. Hospitals are like sausage factories pushing patients through. They're not geared towards actual health and wellness, but just machines that go bing. I don't like most hospitals. I'm sure there are some good ones, but I can appreciate why Jesus wasn't born in one. Point being, we are too dependent on the artificial system, the system that supports Dajjali values. With one final push, and after all of that, beloved Isa was born, peace be upon them both. So many a mother is amazed by the experience of birth because she goes through the most horrific trauma, and afterwards she's holding such exquisite beauty and innocent purity with an intensity that matches the pain that helped produce this miracle. Indeed, the baby was a matter decreed, but what of his mother's fate? Feeling bruised and relieved, she has to return to this misogynist society that is quick to judge and persecute women. She was instructed to take a vow of silence and indicate to her son for the response. She bravely and faithfully did so. She just went through that ordeal, so what can't she face? Like all other women, she would have had the signs of birth, like excessive bleeding, which would have to be addressed by some sort of cloth and traces of embryonic fluid on parts of her and left on the baby as a protection, not to mention the signs of fatigue and swelling around the face after the sweat had dried. There was no doubt that she gave birth instead of finding the baby stranded. People immediately questioned her aggressively, and like many other women who were abused, it was assumed by default that she was to blame for whatever happened. It didn't matter that her conduct had been consistent and that she always exercised modesty. Such was their disrespect for women that they ignored her well-earned reputation and the fruits of her character while jumping to conclusions. They took it upon themselves to remind her of the piety of her parents and the lineage of decency she came from by referring to her as the sister of Harun, about her being named after a woman of great religious standing. In the spirit of trust and silence, she indicated that the baby would speak, which they typically scoffed at. But then he spoke. Is this hard for you to believe? Isn't the Lord who created Adam from clay with no parents the same Lord who fertilized the egg without a father, the same Lord who made the baby speak? Is anything impossible, and does he not defend us when we quietly put our trust in him? Who is the provider and the protector? Is it man or God? So what could Maryam fear? Peace be upon Jesus. He spoke as predicted, and he proclaimed the clear affirmation, quote, I am God's servant. He has given me the book and made me a prophet, and I am blessed wherever I am. And he enjoyed me with prayer and charity as long as I remain alive, and made me dutiful to my mother and not arrogant. End quote. Before I continue with the English translation of the quote, I just want to contemplate this last statement. What was it like being Maryam, holding her son, and hearing those sweet words of loyalty to his mother? If a son said that at any age his mother's heart would fill up and bubble with ecstatic joy, it would burst. How would a woman feel when breakfast is brought to her in bed by her children, accompanied by a flower in a vase and a card drawn exclusively for her? As a mother, I can only imagine that she could have felt the extremely overwhelming version of that. The beautiful baby continued, quote, and peace be upon me the day I was born, and the day I pass away, and the day I'm raised alive. This is a translation from the verse in the Quran under Surah Maryam. A whole chapter is named after Mary, mother of Jesus, where God affirms that it is not befitting for him to take a son. He is the ultimate provider and protector over all women, children, and therefore men. So why am I referring to Miriam as a single mother, and what does it have to do with other women who find themselves in similar predicaments, either because they were divorced from pharaohs, widowed, raped, or were a different woman when they conceived? A single mother has no choice but to believe in miracles and be open to fruits out of season. She must know that bi'ithnillah, she is enough for her children and her family. At times, she must cling to that rope of faith and pray with intense focus just to get by, but that is only temporary. All tests are. I've picked up other stories about the youth of Jesus and Mary from other Islamic traditions, and they apparently traveled to Egypt with him acting as her escort when he was close to the same age she was when she gave birth to him. She was close to the age he would later be when he departed this world. It is alleged that they did a pilgrimage from where their ancestors broke free from the bonds of slavery and left with Moses, peace be upon him. If it is true that they went, then it would have been a significant journey, both intellectually and energetically. I'm not sure as to the strength of this record, but part of me would like to think it's true because I like the idea of her praying and meditating for years, being told of this place by her mentor, going through her hectic ordeal, and then later exploring the landscape of ancient civilizations that are rooted in her own religious and biological Jewish ancestry as part of her journey through life. Especially if you consider her walking in the same steps as Moses' mother when she put her baby in the basket, or Asya when she picked him up, peace be upon all of them. Maybe Miriam and her son stood where Asya declared her faith, or where her soul was taken by Allah before her body was crushed by the rock. If so, then it would have been a prophetic reminder of similar events to come, but Allahu Alam. There was also the incident in both Christian and Muslim tradition that he disappeared once, and she found him in the temple debating with the other Pharisee scholars. And as for Joseph, well, he may have been a feature later, at least as a patron, according to some other Gospels and historians on Celtic Judaism, who claim that there was a wealthy merchant who traveled from Jerusalem and across Europe to trade and help pave the way for Unitarian Christian growth. He was also mentioned in the Gospel of Barnabas towards the end. Again, Allahu Alam, God knows best. But whether Miriam got married and had more children later is unclear, and it's unclear for a reason. The Quran, which has been backed by a variety of actual scientific evidence, draws our attention to the clarity of her virginity, her labor, and her role as a vulnerable single mother, along with the climax with her son's declaration. Her son, by the way, was the only man in history at that point with his mother's name as his surname, bin Miriam, son of Mary, or Mary's son. How is that for anti-misogyny? And yet Christianity today, unfortunately, has been hijacked again by the same imperialistic and patriarchal forces that continue to undermine not just the roles of mothers and women, but fathers and men in other areas. The reconciliation between men and women will be dealt with in the next few chapters, but before women start working on their marital and communication skills, they need to first be established in the solid truth that God is enough and more than sufficient for them. And so they are enough for their children, bi'ithnillah. That yaqeen, certainty, with self-connecting to the Creator leads to balance and constructive building in all relationships. So like our mother of inspiration, the focus should be there first and foremost. The clarity of truth strengthens the faith and creates our foundation as believers while providing closure. So what can we women take from this now that we have expelled the abusive and narcissistic pharaohs from our lives and found ourselves with children in a world that either pity, dismisses, or seeks to exploit the single mother? The colonial slave masters, as part of their strategy to unjustly place themselves as lords over others, used to deliberately separate families after, quote, breeding them so that they could, quote, negotiate the females against their will in fear of their, quote, children, end quote. While Islam strictly kept ties of kinship by elevating the women to the status of wives with the same rights and children with the same rights as the other children. As a result, our historical racism has created a racially distinct world visually, while a nation that gave slaves their rights and broke down class systems and tribal divisions through marriage became more blended and one in appearance and unity. Ultimately, we all belong to the Creator, whether we believe in Him or not, and indeed, we all come from Him, and we all will be returned to Him. So, the believing single mother learns to trust, patience, acceptance, to be mindful of her Lord in respect of Him and gratitude. And more importantly, she must know that in the light of her Lord, she is enough. There's another story coming up about another single mother of faith, and her story leads us to the third greatest woman of all time, to be continued, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.